I think for a lot of people, their first experience of choral music is, particularly for myself, it was playing an orchestral instrument and then being introduced to a choir in that way. So adding in a choir to what is essentially an orchestral piece, and then often performed in sort of local churches where you've got this big boomy acoustic and you've just got these masses of people who are joining you for this big performance, which would usually be like the St. John Passion, St. Matthew Passion. So choral music to me at that stage of my life always meant adding in to an orchestra, so I'd never really heard choral singers by themselves. In orchestral music, you're listening to lots of different styles, lots of different instruments, and you're picking out bits that you like in that. For example, you might like a particular composer because of the way they use the orchestra, or which particular motifs that you're enjoying. But in choral music, you've got composers setting texts over and over again. So even though it might sound like it's going to be more of the same, you're hearing distinct differences, which makes it really, really beautiful, because you'll hear a new setting, say, of the Ave Maria and think, oh, it's so clever that this composer's picked out this particular part, or wow, it's amazing that they set it in this way in comparison to how another composer's done it. So that's particularly strong in Aura Singers, because what we do is we commission living composers to write reflections on Renaissance works. So you're hearing a new modernised version of something that was old. So it's, whilst it might sound like it doesn't have as much variety, what you're hearing is actually even more delicate differences that you don't get in orchestral music. I think to a first-time choral listener, what you're wanting to hear is just something really beautiful and really well performed. I always recommend Richard Allane's Vita Te Miraculum, which is a reflection on Thomas Tallis's Vita Te Miraculum. It's this wash of sound which is just so absorbing, and there are sections that repeat and you hear slight differences each time that happens. Other interesting settings are Ken Burton does a setting of Many of the Wonders, which then became the name of our third album. It uses gospel influence, and so he's really taken on this jazzy style. And there's a particular section that I really like in the middle of it, which I think sounds a bit like a theme tune for something like Desperate Housewives. It's really jazzy, and it's more like orchestral writing in the sort of the way he used rhythm and sort of bounces off with the singers, which I think is very distinctly different from a lot of the other works. I think one of the best places to start if you're trying to get into choral music is some of the really simple sort of church service types of music that involve a lot of sort of plain chant, the setting of the church, which is obviously where most choral music was intended to be performed. It's very, very simple, but it sort of realigns your brain into thinking, okay, this is the world of choral music, and then everything off that has grown from it. So you can sort of see when you listen to a more modern piece where it's come from, which makes it even more interesting because you're experiencing the journey. Aura's albums are incredible. The way they balance this, so you've got old pieces and then new pieces, and so it takes you on that journey through the album. So actually, of course, I recommend listening to Aura's albums, but they really demonstrate this well if you're a first-time listener. You can find all choral music on the usual places, so iTunes, Spotify, or even YouTube. Something I'd recommend above just searching for the song that you're looking for would be to get to know a group really well, and the quality of the singing does completely transform your experience. So if you find a group that you know is particularly high quality choral singing and then find them on Spotify, you'll be able to listen to hundreds and hundreds of recordings. There is a lot of choral music out there, which might be surprising if you've never come across it yet. But there's a real wealth to be accessed through them.